Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We have Phil Holden, our deputy leader, is going to join me later on to talk about various issues of the day, and we'll respond to comments as well. I mean, updates about what we're up to in the family party. It's a busy time. We've got a lot of irons in the fire and things developing. It's not the stage to talk about them just yet, but there's some quite encouraging things. The leadership team is going to be meeting for a strategy day in a couple of weeks, and we're going to start looking at some longer-term plans and look at some of the fundamentals about the party. And then that process will go out to the party more broadly, to branch meetings, to all members and supporters as well, inviting people to contribute to that. So that process is getting underway. We're always interested to hear people's feedback and ideas, so there will be an opportunity for that, I'll say, through this process in the next few weeks. Do fire the comments in. We'll try and look at comments as we're going along. But I've got a list of 6 or 7 items from the news this week. Some of them are, well, all of them, hopefully, very interesting indeed. And Phil is going to join us to discuss. Right. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening.
Right. So lots of things to talk about. Now, Phil is a bit of a techie expert. So we'll start with something along those lines. And those of you who've been following our social media will have seen that we've been doing a bit of complaining this week about social media. I mean, Facebook, for a start. On Facebook recently, I was with someone, and they went to their Facebook page, and they tried to find the Scottish Family Party. So they did a search, Scottish Family Party, return, chose pages, and we just were not there. A few of our minor accounts for local branches came up. The fake account imitating us came up. But the Scottish Family Party account, nowhere to be seen. Every other political party I could think of, just put in the name and their official Facebook page comes up top of the list. But ours appeared to be hidden. So a few people have said to me, I can't find your page on Facebook. And I've thought to myself, for goodness sake, how difficult is it? Just put in Scottish Family Party and press search. But now I realize this is what's happening. Facebook had been hiding our page. I mean, last year, they made it so that if you went to like our page, a little message came up saying, are you sure? Material they post. Are you sure you want to like this page? And the latest thing is, is this thing where you can't search for us. Having said that, no sooner did that post go up, that started working again. When you do a search now on Facebook, it seems to work. Let us know in the comments. Give it a try now. Have a search for the Scottish Family Party on Facebook and see if it works. Let us know in the comments. That's been Facebook. But another thing with Facebook, I'm not certain at all that there's anything suspicious, anything dodgy about this. It's slightly suspicious, though. In the election, I set up a big advert on Facebook to promote the party election broadcast in areas where we had a lot of candidates. It was a substantial sum of money that was going to be spent on that, a 4-figure sum. So I had it all set up. It was approved. And as far as I was concerned, that was that. Job done, ticked off the to-do list, leave that advert to run. It got to virtual election day. I realized it had just completely disappeared from Facebook's advertising system. No record of it at all. Not there, being declined or any problem with it. It had just completely dematerialized from Facebook's business page that they used to do the adverts. So again, probably an innocent explanation. But when you know they're against you, you do tend to think, well, you just wonder what might have happened. What do you feel? Is that typical of Facebook? Do you hear many stories about Facebook? These sort of things?
It's very hard to know what goes on inside. I think it has been interesting seeing what's happened with Twitter, with Elon Musk sort of attempting to buy it, and that opened up some of the inner workings of Twitter. We saw several kind of interesting internal meetings that happened there and things like that. I know maybe a couple of people that work inside Facebook, but their roles aren't anything to do with moderation or anything like that. So I don't know what happens in there, but it does seem strange, that these kind of things happen. Yeah.
It also seems strange that it seemed to fix as soon as we alerted, as soon as we put on Facebook, dear Mark Zuckerberg, stop interfering in Scottish politics. I mean, it's hard to imagine that Facebook are actually monitoring that and responding to it. But anyway, the fact is that almost immediately it fixed and you can find it. So thanks to those of you who just tested that out. It seems okay. I mean, Phil, you mentioned Twitter. Now, I think on Twitter, we've been nobbled on Twitter for years. We would keep bouncing off the same number. And it was really obvious that just our account was limited. Simple as that. And when Elon Musk was talking about taking over, during that process, I heard a lot of people saying, wow, suddenly my Twitter account seems free. It's growing. It must have been restricted before, but Twitter are trying to clean up their act in terms of censorship. And suddenly it seems free. So Twitter seems to have got better, and our account has grown a little bit. Just over the last few weeks, not for long, just the last few weeks, it's gone through what seemed to be the glass ceiling we had. So Twitter, good news. But YouTube is the other one. I made a video. Now we're just going to play taboo here because this has been streamed on YouTube. And if YouTube picks up the naughty words, we might end up in trouble. So YouTube took down a video that I made. They said it was hate speech. So I appealed against it. And within minutes, they replied saying, no, they reviewed it again and said it's definitely hate speech. I think maybe the confirmation came possibly like sooner than it would take to watch the video again. I'm not sure. So they turned down the appeal. Now, the video was the one I made about chimpanzee sickness. You know, chimpanzee sickness that's going around at the moment, and suggesting that it seemed to be being spread by a particular act among a particular community in a particular type of event. So I suggested that health advice in line with that about being cautious of that sort of event might be appropriate. Now, the same point, I've seen it made by other people on YouTube repeatedly. I've seen it's been made in the Spectator magazine. The same point's been made in the Atlantic magazine. And I've seen other people on YouTube making the same point much more outrageously, aggressively, intemperately than I made it in my video. And yet, taken down as hate speech. What's your theory, Phil? I mean, how could that be? Do the other ones just not get reported, or?
I guess it might be reporting on that or something like that. You know, interestingly, a family member has just like lost some email on Gmail, and she said, "How can I get in contact to get this restored?" No, that's hopeless. You know, you'll never get through to a human. And so it's nice to think that, you know, that there's people especially looking out for us, you know, within these big organizations, and maybe there are. But yeah, I think you can't know what's happening. You can just speculate.
You could just be put in a category there, couldn't they? They could just put some marker on your channel.
Yeah, I think like
who knows how.
Reporting is a more likely thing, that if there's particular people that are following us right now and waiting for us to misstep and fire in the complaints, then you know, well,
just fire in the complaints regardless. Probably that's probably the system. Yes, it's very frustrating. I mean, some people say, you know, get an account on BitChute, whatever, which you can do, but you lose a lot of contact with people. Normally, if I'm sent a video on BitChute, when I watch it, I tend to think, whoa, this is a bit far out. And it's, let's leave it at that. In any case, I would say BitChute tends to be populated by channels, communicators, or whatever, who are way, way outside the mainstream, much more so than I would say the Scottish Family Party. So I don't think we belong there, really. I mean, what we're saying is in line with, you know, it's minority opinion, but it's, you know, fairly mainstream as well. So yeah, I don't feel we should be pushed off to the fringes onto BitChute, but maybe some things that's what we need to do. We need to put it on a different forum. But at one point, this is quite funny actually. A couple of years ago, I put a YouTube video, a Scottish Family Party YouTube video on Facebook. I just put the link on Facebook. It was about SNP indoctrination in schools. Yeah. And Facebook took it down and said, this is hate speech, breaks our regulations. I appealed. They said, no, you can. So they took it down, hate speech. And then a year or two later, by mistake, I'd forgotten what happened. By mistake, I put that video again on Facebook, and immediately it took it down and said, right, hate speech, definitely. Yeah. And I've got no idea why. I mean, there's nothing unusual with the video. But the funny thing is, that same video is on Facebook as a Facebook video.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that happen? So they're hosting that video themselves. Yet.
Yeah. So when it was posted as a link as a YouTube video, they didn't like it.
No.
You're saying, and you reposted it as the same link and they still didn't like it. It'll just have a record of that URL and say, this is something we've banned before.
Yeah.
Person's trying to post it again.
How would they, on what grounds would they ban it? To say the same video is on Facebook?
They wouldn't know. They wouldn't have recognized it's the same video, basically. So
it's very strange. Very strange. Yes, that's social media. Always a challenge. I mean, always a concern. Ultimately, I always look at social media, and I think there are so many people on social media that, if they're tightening up and various people are for the chop, there's an awful lot that should be for the chop before us. Because there's people who are pretty outrageous and a bit obnoxious and aggressive, or whatever, on social media. And I always tend to think, if they're surviving, I mean, we're nowhere near that. I mean, that they're far more. They would justify far more criticism than we do. But on the other hand, I worry that there's no rhyme or reason to the decisions that they make. So what I was saying is, sign up to the newsletter. Sign up to the newsletter. But having said that, let's talk about the newsletter. We use MailChimp, and it unsubscribes people. Sometimes someone will come up as unsubscribe. We'll contact them and say, just checking. Did you unsubscribe? No. And now you may think, oh, maybe people did, but they're a bit embarrassed. I'll tell you one of the people who they claim unsubscribed, me.
Yeah.
And you wonder what's going on there. I mean, you can become a bit paranoid, but I mean, if they unsubscribe me, and I definitely no way had unsubscribed, then you just wonder what's going on there. I mean, are we in their bad books in some way? Who knows?
Well, I think the same organizations that in the States, there was quite an openly coordinated deplatforming of Trump. And to me, it was surprising how many organizations moved together at the same time. I think MailChimp might have been on that list. But there was quite a number that basically, were willing to take a political stance, basically, when it comes to content.
But I would think MailChimp would be breaking the law or breaking their contract if they were deliberately unsubscribing people from your contact list. I think that's not like Twitter kicking you off or anything like that. I think that would be.
I think the hard thing with these companies that, this is what I was saying to the friend who was struggling with their email, is that you think of Google, it's got billions of users and, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of employees, maybe. So they really can't have a customer services department that deals with all the problems of all their users. So, I don't know. Is there some unit in there which is just like the political monitoring unit? It seems hard to. Well, I don't know if it's hard to believe or not, but yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's not like someone sitting watching everything we do, but just if there's just like something you can click on the account or something that gets triggered on the account by some automated process.
Yeah, I mean, there's the report feature on things, and if something gets reported a lot, but something like random unsubscribing, that's a bit more weird, isn't it? Well, Twitter has this concept of the shadow ban, and other platforms have the concept of the shadow ban. It's a bit like the non-crime hate incident or something like that. It's basically, we're gonna let you hear because we've got a vague commitment to freedom of speech, and you haven't really violated any of our policies. But we don't really like what you're saying, and so we're going to treat you differently. And that manifests on Twitter as them not kind of promoting your material. I suppose the equivalent on MailChimp would be that, random unsubscriptions.
But we've had the same with Facebook. About a year ago, during the election campaign last year, Facebook restricted our page basically for the duration of the election campaign. And one of the things they said we said, we're not suggesting your page to other people. For example, on Twitter, I get recommendations for other political parties routinely. I'd be interested to know if anyone's ever, well, you probably wouldn't know because you probably already follow us, but it'd be interesting to know if anyone gets a recommendation to follow the Scottish Family Party on Twitter.
Yeah,
I would suspect not, or if they do, it would be a very recent thing. But I suspect not. I suspect not.
I thought one interesting thing on this was Elon Musk. So he, through attempting to buy Twitter, it lots of people in lots of governments became unhappy with that, and lots of corporations. And recently, I think it was the S&P 500, they delisted Elon Musk from their ESG, which is basically environmentally friendly companies. And they said, you can't be in the S&P 500. We've decided that your policies are they're not right for this list. And then ExxonMobil is, I think, in their top 10 of like responsible companies. And so
if you make electric cars, then you're
sustainable things, aiming to electrify the planet, run everything on renewable energy and all these things. And so it just shows that the ESG stuff is a joke. It's completely politically motivated, and so there is something trying to shut down certain voices, I think.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's move on. Right. The next thing, on a lighter note, I've got a song here. Would you like me to sing it, or would you like me to just read it out?
Sing it for me.
No one said sing it in the comments, so I'll just read it. And someone said this, that their kid had been singing it at primary school. And I think they've been sent the words home to learn it at home or something. Now, I mean, this is not like really bad, but it's just interesting insight into some of the sort of ethos of Scottish education. So I'm not making a big deal of this, but you'll find it interesting, I think. So I don't know what the tune is. If I knew the tune, that might help. Anyway, this is the age of technology. Right, this is the age of technology. Something for everyone. Welcome to the age of technology. This is the age of fun. So it's not exactly profound. Let's put it that way. Computers there to train you, hi-fi to entertain you. No need to use your brain, you may say, but we like our world this way.
Yeah.
Now, well, one could suggest that's not maybe an ideal message. When I was teaching, I used to have a big sign above the PC in my classroom, and it had an arrow pointing to the computer. And it said, beware, this machine does not have a brain. This is sort of the opposite message. Anyway, I'll carry on. With microwaves to use now and DVDs to choose now, so many things to fuse, you may say, but we like our world this way. With mixers and blenders for music today, with software for every computer to play, with cars that can talk to us, I can see. And one day there might be a microchip me.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, what on earth is that talking about? A microchip me? I mean, does that make...
Well, I think that idea is that you might somehow be able to get your consciousness into a chip. And so this would be the idea that there's no real soul within people. And it was something I was thinking about as a child. I thought, well, your brain is just made up of like neurons. You started to have cochlear implants, which is when you put like a hearing aid in somebody's ear, but it's actually wired into their neurons. And thinking, well, if that's just one neuron, what would happen if you replace all the neurons with like wires and chips and interconnects? Does that mean that you can move your consciousness into a computer? And I kind of did the maths of it and realized that, how much memory you would need in a computer and how unfeasibly complex it would need to be to do one brain, because every neuron's got, I can't remember how many, like tens of thousands of connections, and you've got billions of neurons. And so it's very hard to simulate on a computer what the brain can do, I think. But yeah, then you've got Elon Musk, the other things he's doing, which is Neuralink, which is putting a chip on your brain. Have you seen that?
No.
So the idea is that you drill a hole in somebody's head, and you put a bunch of wires in there, and it enables you to I guess detect the frequencies in different areas of the brain, and then you can try and work out what the person is thinking. Or so they did it with some chimpanzees, and they got some chimpanzees to play with these in their brain. And so basically they fed them banana milkshake every time they kind of move the paddle to hit the ball to the other end, and these monkeys could play pong with their brain. And they were incredibly good at doing it. And so it's got kind of lots of very interesting uses. One is for repairing injuries and things. So it's like some positive uses for it. But also it can be used for kind of interesting other things like telepathy or something like that, like essentially sending a message into somebody else. But it's a Bluetooth device. So you can get apps for it and things like that.
I mean, I've heard of things where things are controlled. Normally you think about it's for like paralyzed people, where things can be controlled by detecting brainwaves. This is quite vague, but I remember seeing something if someone knew what they had to think of just to switch the light on or whatever. They had to think of a particular thing,
and so
that would make it happen.
They started off very vague, that you'd put a sensor on the outside of somebody's brain, and you'd have to think of something quite extreme to move it. Like you'd have to become really angry to move it left, and happy to move it right, or something like that. And it would be able to detect something of the difference between the brain waves for these things. So Elon Musk's Neuralink basically has thousands of these little wires that go into your brain, and the more wires you put in, the higher resolution you can detect people's thoughts with. And that they could kind of reconstruct the stride of pigs and things like that, and exactly see how they were moving. And so they're getting a fair degree of, I guess, resolution at something like mind reading. But the interesting thing is that the thing will work both ways. So if rather than reading the electrical signals, you send in electrical signals, you can start to stimulate areas of the brain. And so, you could maybe have something where every time somebody thinks of Richard Lucas, they become angry for no reason.
They get what? Sorry, angry or?
They get angry for no reason. So you look at the areas of the brain which stimulate when they think of Richard Lucas. You look at the areas of the brain that stimulate when somebody gets angry, and every time they see a picture of Richard Lucas, they think, that's not a very good man. I'll never vote for him. But yeah.
Okay, so some concerns, you would say, with the ethical concerns.
I think this is like an interesting thing in the kind of trans debate, where walls are being broken down. Because trans is about sort of transitioning biologically from male to female or female to male. And what that opens up is that it's reasonable for us to change our bodies, basically. From a Christian perspective, I'd say God made us in his own image. He made us male and female. And the sort of, I guess, transgender ideology is that there's a complete spectrum of genders. And there's another community called the transhumanist community. And the transhumanist is basically, have I frozen?
No,
the transhumanist community basically says that we should be able to alter ourselves in other ways, basically. And so there's technology out there. There's something called CRISPR, which allows us to edit genes. There's some quite promising research there for kind of curing AIDS and things, because AIDS, changes the DNA in your body, and that's how it kind of reproduces. And so the only way to kind of get rid of it is to edit your DNA. But you can edit it in any way that you want as well. And so these technologies are quite easy to produce. You don't need a big lab to be able to do it. It's just a case of what you're willing to experiment with. And so that's kind of interesting technologies which are out there.
Yeah. But the gene editing thing, I mean, what's that been used for in humans so far? Has it been used in humans?
There was a guy who stood up at a conference and he injected himself with something that would edit his genes, basically. So like a maverick scientist, I've forgotten his name, but he ended up dying. I don't think it was a direct result of what happened. I think it might have been somehow related to mental health issues and things like that. I don't remember the full story there. But basically, you could see that he didn't need a big company behind him. He didn't need, that this is like a small lab can start working with CRISPR technologies and things like that. And so guarantee that some research is going on somewhere where people are working on these things.
Okay, well, we will look at that a bit more today. I'd just like to. We're obviously reaching a higher class of audience these days, so we'd like to welcome the Duke of Bedford. Also, Sir Thomas Lipton as well. It's really good to see us going up market and having these distinguished figures with us. You just got a nod from Thomas Aquinas as well. All the best people tune into our live stream. Okay, right. I haven't finished the song yet. We're almost there. Let's get to the punchline. With every type of pill, you never need be ill. I mean, that's just a bit stupid, isn't it? I mean, why would you want primary school kids singing that? I mean, I'd imagine the person who wrote it thought, that rhymes, so I'll put that in. But really, is that the best we can do in schools? Do eat and drink your fill while you may, for we like our world this way. Hey, hey. I mean, as I say, not making a big deal.
Inspired.
Yeah, I think that just illustrates a bit of a values vacuum in schools that they just have to sing drivel like that. They haven't got anything more substantial to be sharing with the children. Anyway, I thought you'd find it interesting. Let's have a look what else has been going on. Right, a quick little story. Here, you probably know I'm a motor racing fan, as you can see by the racing cars in my studio. I've been a subscriber to Autosport magazine for a little while, partly because one of my sons has been really into racing as well. But I've just got fed up with its political content. I mean, there's all the, some of the drivers, they do the LGBT thing and various other political issues. They will be doing the Black Lives Matter, taking the knee. And the magazine just writes as though it assumes just everyone's completely on board. And if a driver wears a rainbow T-shirt, that's really great. How brave! What a role model! That's absolutely fantastic. Just the assumption that everyone agrees. So I decided to cancel my subscription. I mean, you get enough of that without having to pay for it. I'm not going to pay for people to deliver that through my letterbox. But I just got this last one. I cancelled it today. This was it would have been the last straw if I hadn't already decided. So this was an interview with the 1982 World Rally Champion, Walter Rall. Now, in 1982, in the World Rally Championship, there was a female rally driver called Michèle Mouton. You might remember if you're a bit more mature. Michèle Mouton is in French. And she's probably the most successful racing or rally driver in the history of the sport. She won World Championship rallies, and she didn't get too far from winning the World Championship. And no other female driver has got anything anywhere near that standard. And at the time, there wasn't particularly huge fuss about it. There wasn't any opposition or anything. It was just, I think people were interested. It would be a talking point. But, she was really good. Didn't quite win the championship. And, that was that. But this interview with Walter Rall, I'll read it to you. It was a funny situation in 1982 with Michèle. Looking back, I have the feeling that it was an unlucky situation. It could have been much better if Michèle had been world champion. This would have been unique in our history with a woman being world champion. I cannot see that ever happening again. I can only say sorry.
Yeah.
That's a man apologizing for winning the World Rally Championship because the competitor in second place was a woman. I mean, how bizarre is that? well, what do you think about that? Have you heard anything quite that far gone on that sort of issue before?
I don't know. I'm not sure that I have, though, but yeah.
I mean, that's like saying nowadays. I mean, motor racing is a sport when there is no need to have a women's version and a men's version, really. I mean, it doesn't need a huge amount of physical strength. It's mainly coordination, mental things. So men and women can compete really on a level playing field. But I suppose if someone said, "Oh, it would have been nice if a woman had won it," you could sort of stretch to that. But to have the man who won it apologize for winning. So what does that imply? The next time there's a woman competitor, I mean, there's no sign of one at the moment, but let's say there was one in Formula One or in World Rally Championship or something, was competing for the title. I think that would be the situation. People would be saying, listen, fella, the competitor, look, you really ought to let her win. If you're a good person, the right thing to do is to let her win, because if you win the championship, you need to apologize for winning instead of a woman. Just bizarre. I bet at the time that thought never crossed his mind. No one would have even begun to think like that in 1982. It was just, well done him for winning, well done her, gave him a good run for his money, and that was that. But anyway, so I phoned them up today, and they asked the reason why I was cancelling the subscription. So I said I was fed up of political content in the magazine. So you get enough things like that without having to pay for it, do you? So that was that. Right, what else have we got? All right, the Scottish public finances are in a bit of a muddle at the moment. There have been numerous reports saying basically that they're projecting that they're going to run out of money. So they're going to have to increase taxes, which is maybe not ideal in a cost of living crisis, or they're going to have to cut public services, which is not really in tune with the SNP's philosophy and the way they present themselves, or they're going to have to sort of beg more money from the UK government, which I think is unlikely to be forthcoming in the quantities that they would need. And Kate Forbes was saying today that she was saying basically public services are going to need to be cut, which is going to be pretty controversial, because the SNP have been big spenders in every direction.
Help them to think where they could cut some things, couldn't you, Richard?
Well, that's exactly where I'm going to go. Actually, with that, we need to share with the SNP our policies.
What's on the block? What's on the block?
Well, the organisations, we think they could cut the funding by. I usually say cut the funding by somewhere in the region of 100%. We could try some of these. Young Scott, are you familiar with them, Phil?
I have heard of them.
They've got a massive office in Haymarket in Edinburgh. You can see in that looks like desks for 40 people, if not more. I mean, they produce sort of politicized advice. They run social media accounts that get very, very little interaction. They run things like the free bus travel scheme is run through them, but that's completely unnecessary. That could be just run by the government. When I was teaching, when I was a housemaster, they used to provide a pack for 13-year-olds. So during that year group, they provide this pack of goodies, of vouchers, and this big advice book. And the advice book, it was so cute. I remember one of the things in it was how to complain about the police. It had nothing about the important role of the police, the importance of obeying the police, what the police are for. It just had a passage of, this is how you can complain about the police. And there were various other things, completely politicized. And so, I mean, one year I just put them all in the bin. I didn't actually give them to boys. They just went in the bin. So Young Scott, the whole organization, could go. Children and Young People's Commissioner. You hear from him occasionally, Phil? Is there Bruce Adamson?
I have. Well, the office was right opposite my flat a while ago, so I used to walk past there. They had a tiny door in it for children.
By the Parliament.
Yeah, and I think the smacking back, that was on the window for many years before it happened, as being something that they took upon themselves to see happen.
Yeah. I mean, the Children and Young People's Commissioner, part of the reason we have one is that the United Nations as far as I can tell, tells you have to have one. It's the same with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. You have to have one of those because the UN says you have to have one, so they can tell your government what to do via human rights legislation as interpreted by the UN. I mean, Children and Young People's Commissioner, I mean, he said things like, when the kids were taking the strike action, so-called, and skipping school on a Friday morning.
Striking.
Yeah. They did it on a Friday morning in Edinburgh because on Friday afternoon they had the afternoon off. So they went and skipped school in the morning instead. And he said, children have got a right to express their views. So therefore they've got a right to protest. Therefore they can skip school. I mean, just complete rubbish. Nothing. I mean, the human right, the children's rights don't imply that at all. So he could go. Equality Network.
Yeah,
that would be a good few million over a few years, I think. I mean, the Equality Network, they exist. Sorry, go on.
The thing here is it's charities which are funded by the government to lobby the government on the government's behalf to provide fake input to the government to say, this is what I'm wanting. And that whole circular system is entirely corrupt. That you can't give money to charities and then ask those charities what their advice is when you're paying them, because the one who pays the piper calls the tune, so
and you get media reports where the Scottish government's done this. Let's go and speak to Tim Hopkins of the Equality Network. What do you think, Tim? I think it's really great what the government has been done. We've been asking for this for years, so well done, SNP. And then next they'll go to someone from the government saying, oh yeah, that's what we did. And that's it. So the media can think, we included a grassroots voice and we got the government, so we did a balanced report. And the government's thinking, what a joke. It's so easy to fool the media here. We just have to pay some people to say what we want to say. And the media treats them as though they're an independent voice. The Scottish Equality Network, the reason they exist, in my view, is that Stonewall would have been a little bit too independent to the government because they're like a UK organisation, whereas Equality Network is entirely under the control of the Scottish government. Basically, they pull the strings completely. So that's why they exist. Equality Network's got a pretty shady family tree. The organisations that preceded it gave birth to the paedophile information exchange, and various characters involved with that. Anyway, Scottish Trans Alliance, that's a branch of the Equality Network. I mean, Creative Scotland, Scottish Human Rights Commission, Equality and Human Rights Commission, just unnecessary. Amnesty International. Now, what's your take on them? Phil, did you know that they're funded by the government in Scotland?
I can't remember if I did or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think I might have seen that in a previous family party video.
I mean, Amnesty International, they take a lot of positions on controversial political issues, like they're for decriminalizing prostitution, which that's against family party policy. They're pro-abortion. I'm sure. I mean, they've got lots of policies where they've got a particular political slant, and they're funded by the Scottish government. And they go into schools, I think, as well. They provide educational resources. So a problem there. White Ribbon. They must be on minimal funding. We don't hear too much about them. That was a government-funded organisation basically to try and turn men into feminists.
Okay.
But I think they seem quite a low level of activity. I mean, Engender, the taxpayer-funded feminists, they spend half the time in their little office by the Royal Mile, the other half the time in the Scottish Parliament telling the MSPs what to do. And the MSPs just nod away. Go ahead and do it. I mean, Crew, they're the people that tell you that taking drugs is fine. Just go ahead if you feel like it, as long as you're careful. Stonewall, I mean, Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth, I mean, if that's not a political campaigning group, then I really don't know what is. And the thing with Friends of the Earth is most people, when they hear of Friends of the Earth, they think independent environmental charity, don't they? But not independent. Same with Greenpeace as well. I think these organizations, these environmental so-called charities, are government funded and EU funded to a huge extent. mean, the list's too long. I won't go through any more on the list. I mean, there's probably about 30 of them that we list in our policies that could just be chopped and no one would notice the difference. It would be, in fact, in some cases, it would even improve the quality of life in Scotland and freedom of speech and government policy making. So if anyone of the government's watching, you want some plans for saving some money, there's a few good ones from us. Okay, how are we doing with a couple of things? In the news recently, there's been a few reports about Scottish government's struggling to recruit child carers for its expansion of childcare, which you're probably aware that they doubled the amount of childcare available to 3 and 4 year olds. I can't remember what it started. It was going up to, was it 1,150 or something hours a year. So basically 3 and 4 year olds could go to nursery morning and afternoon, whereas previously you would just go to morning or afternoon. So, I mean, they bragged that this was costing £1 billion. But I mean, the overspend in the budget is looking like being maybe 3 million or so. So there's £1 billion, could have been said. So they're bragging that they spent £1 billion on it, but they just can't get enough staff to do it. And the obvious thing is basically they're trying to replace the family. They're trying to say to every family, we'll look after your kids. You go and do something more important and more interesting and more valuable and more meaningful or whatever. Because obviously you don't want to be looking after your own kids. We'll look after your kids for you. You go and do something else. We don't care what. Go and do something else. And then they find they can't get enough people to look after the kids. I mean, and the frustrating thing is that in the political discussion in the parliament, no one will say, well, hang on a minute, your whole idea here is flawed. You've made it your mission to replace family and you can't do it. And instead of saying, right, you need to change your mission, make your mission to support families instead of replace them in terms of childcare. But no one says it.
And the tax issue is going to be huge, I guess, because we're seeing inflation. Is it 9% at the moment?
I think it's
pretty high, isn't it?
Depends how you measure it. I think 6 is one, but there's different measures.
Yeah, because that's going to affect all the tax thresholds, because it's going to effectively, that it's going to mean that you're paying the higher rates of tax much sooner, or much more of your salary is going to be in that area. And so, if on top of that taxes rise rather than fall, then that's going to affect people in a big way, I think.
Yeah. It's fascinating on this, because all the parties, their pitch to women, or a big part of their pitch to women is, we'll give you more childcare. We'll subsidize more childcare, provide more childcare. And yet surveys consistently show that mothers of young children, a majority of them would like to work less, whereas the government puts policies that are assuming, or geared towards women who would like to be working more.
Yeah.
And there's this big disconnect. And so you would think it would, just on the basis of the evidence, you'd think that would be an open goal for some existing party in the parliament to say, actually, we're going to try and appeal to this section of electorate. But I think part of it is that they don't understand the issue. They're completely unaware of the issue. And I think families as well, they don't even think of the possibility that the government could try to support them in that way.
Yeah.
Because they've never heard any talk of it. So I think we've really got an uphill struggle to communicate these policies, because it really is starting from zero, because it's just never even discussed.
Yeah, I think like the most important thing for my wife, works, and for her finding work, it was finding jobs where she could be free to pick up our child on time. That was the thing that made the difference between being able to get a job and not, where companies are open to letting her work less hours, basically, and getting a reduced salary. Then that opens the door for her. But it's always something that she has to first get the job, and then once they've accepted her, she then says, can I do this? While negotiating salary or whatever else. So it's at that stage. But it really should be something which I think companies are, if they want a more diverse workforce, that would be a way of achieving it, is to try and work around childcare and things like that.
I mean, I would imagine that certainly big businesses, big companies try to do that. Is there a significant effort in that direction already?
There's been a shift, I think, and particularly with pandemic things, everyone's been working from home. It's made some things a lot easier with childcare, and people are rethinking working practices coming out of the pandemic. But I think that flexibility is a huge thing. So it's things like, how do we accommodate the time that people have, to and the contribution they can make within a business,
Yeah. Right. The next little news story. You might have seen this one in a few places. There'd been a case, I think, somewhere in England, where a sperm donor had fathered 15 children just in the
hadn't
last
seen that
year
one.
or two.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
15 children. And it's now been discovered that he's got a genetic defect that he was fully aware of that leads to low IQ, some developmental difficulties. Basically, the sort of thing that any sperm bank would have said, no way. Are you suitable for that? And so some of the women who've had children, like lesbian couples, they're complaining about it. I was thinking the whole thing, the whole idea of donor conception, we've got a problem with, because we think children should be brought up by their mum and dad, by their biological mother and father. So the problem with that, full stop. But now the fact that this complaint is being made, I'm just sort of looking at that from the point of view of eugenics. Because this is, they're complaining about the quality of genetic material they got there. Because obviously you only want to reproduce with the best genetic material. I mean, is making this argument in terms of donor conception, is that inevitably like breaching the taboo about eugenics?
I think it has to be in some ways, because where do you put that line in between what's a sort of irresponsible and what's not? It's impossible to put that anywhere without saying that there's this set of human beings who we think it would be better if you didn't exist. We don't think, whilst we believe in equality, we think you're somehow less equal and deserving of life.
Yeah.
Because
the question isn't whether you would like a person to have some sort of illness or developmental condition, or whether that person wouldn't have it. The question is whether you want this person to exist as opposed to this person. So it's a judgment between the value of people, isn't it? Now, some people, one academic in particular, he claims that you don't make that decision for the benefit of the parents or whatever. You're making it for the benefit of the person to be born.
Yeah.
But the reaction to that normally is no, it's not. It's not the person to be born. You're choosing which person is to be born. I mean, just while we're on the eugenics topic, I mean, it's quite an interesting topic if we push it to the extremes. I mean, some people would say, let's say there's a couple who are wanting to have children, and the woman's been taking some sort of drug that is known that within like 2 months after you've been taking it, if you conceive a child, it's very likely to have some sort of developmental problem, serious developmental problem. So the doctor could say, right, so here's the drug, wait for a couple of months before conceiving a child. And the couple, if they thought, okay, that's fine, we'll wait a couple of months, and then they have a child. Now, some people would say that that's wrong. That's eugenics as well, because you're saying that you value or want to have the child without the defect over the child who would have had it. So probably some people even in that case would say that that is a case of eugenics, so the couple shouldn't make that decision. What do you think of that one?
I wouldn't see that as eugenics. I think that people do wait for sometimes the right circumstances to have children, you know, and that would be people who use contraception and people who don't use contraception. They say, right, this is this is when I'm going to have children, this is when I'm not, so that there is something in planning family without going line, I think.
Yeah. So I suppose a similar case could be if someone, let's say a woman had been drinking very heavily, and she, you know, she got our wedding box, and it said, you know, you should cut down alcohol consumption for conceiving, and she thought, oh yeah, right, good point. So I'll cut down my alcohol consumption. Wait a few months till that's settled down, then we'll have children. I think surely there can't be a problem with that. Maybe the issue with that is it's not trying to influence the genetic makeup of the child directly. It's deciding when to have the child. So it's not the central thing is not which child you want, it's when. But on the other hand, when people do say that is a case of making the value judgment of which child you want and which one you don't want, yeah, I think it gets, I haven't quite settled that one in my own mind. It's a tricky one.
Have you followed the artificial womb kind of stuff going on as well? So this is there's a sort of ethical debate around if that's a right thing or not, basically, you know, that
there's some people say on there that would be the end of the abortion issue. So if a woman wanted to dispose of the child within, then it could be transferred to an artificial womb, continue to gestate, then be brought into the world and adopted. So this is only, it's very theoretical. So some people say in theory that could like be the end of the abortion issue. I suspect it wouldn't be, because you'd still get some women who would say, no, I don't want the thought of my child being with someone else. I want an abortion. I think there still would be abortion. Is the technology anywhere near fruition? I don't think it is it?
I'm not sure how near it is. I think there was something there was an attempt. There's somebody talking about a womb transplant in the sort of transgender space.
Okay.
I don't know where that's going. That doesn't sound great.
I would be amazed if anywhere near that function.
I think people are talking about it from an ethical perspective at the moment, and I think that the fear I'd have is that it would possibly lead to more eugenics, because you're deciding to intercept the egg and the sperm more deliberately, and so you'd probably have something which basically makes people temporarily infertile or something like that, but you've collected eggs and you've collected sperm beforehand, and then over the course of their life, when they want children, they pay for it on Amazon or something like that, and then 9 months later your child arrives from Amazon, and you maybe...
This is an issue I've had it on my list to make a video about for a long time, and there's an organization in Royal Glasgow Hospital that's called I think it's called the Glasgow Fertility Clinic. It's private, but it's under the auspices of the NHS, and they basically it's a eugenics center. So you can go in and choose donors from, mainly in Europe. I can't remember the reason for that, but mainly from Europe. But I've been into it, and it is just a catalogue. You see people's photographs and find out information about them, and you can select the donor that you want. I mean, pure and simple eugenics going on there. But I say, it's sitting there in the hospital in Glasgow. I think that's a debate that needs kicking into the public sphere. At the moment, it goes on in academic circles at a very high level, but I think it hasn't really broken through into popular level debate. So that's something we might try to make happen one way or another. Right, talking about kicking debates off and getting attention and campaigning, we're going to be looking at a few ideas over the next couple of weeks with our strategy meeting, etc. What are your thoughts about that for us going forward? Any tricks we should be trying, or any?
I mean, there's some things that I'm sort of like. I think in the council elections, we've basically, that the challenge has been to get leaflets out to homes. Maybe a third of our candidates that stood were actively campaigning, and 2/3 of them were there to give people the ability to vote for the family party and just to vote for what they believe in. And so our next challenge is kind of the Westminster elections. And the great thing there is that the Royal Mail will deliver our leaflets. As long as we print them, they'll deliver them for free. And so in this season, we really need to think about how we campaign and how we persuade people. We might like to think that there's a silent majority out there just need to hear of us and they'll vote for us. But actually, maybe the silent majority has been silent so long that we've lost some of them, and we need to actually start making the case for what we believe. And so I'm hoping that over the summer we can try out some things and try engaging a bit more with the public and things like that. And yeah, I think something that's kind of I'm challenged by is maybe this idea of anything you can do, we can do. And so this is to do with diversity. My daughter had I think a diversity club at school, and she came home and she said, "Oh, we had a diversity lesson today." That was just her getting the word wrong. No political thing there. But I thought that was actually quite a good term for it, because if you're going to a school or an office, you have often these kind of I guess it's like approved societies or special interest groups. So they might be things like an LGBT group, a women's group, a race group, or something like that. And so maybe a workplace might have rules like nobody is allowed to use the work systems for anything related to politics or to religion, unless they've been approved by that company. And but then in the same place, you'd have these groups through which you basically have a platform for feminism, for critical race theory, and kind of the LGBT view of sexuality. And around these, you'll have various kind of events and things like that. So you'll have maybe Women's Month, Women's History Month, LGBT History Month, Black History Month. And maybe we need to start thinking about some months for things that, represent values that we have, and
the odds of take up are going to be pretty remote, haven't they? How would we?
Well, I think the demand here is that if what you're saying is that that you want diversity, and diversity is couched in the language of sexuality, religion, race, and gender, and basically, I don't like seeing things along those lines. That I know lots of people who might belong to a minority group, but they don't view themselves as that minority. They don't want that to be the primary thing that you see them as, like a black person who doesn't necessarily feel included because they get to be in a club with black people. That doesn't really mean inclusion. But I think that we should be taking some of these opportunities, basically. That some of the things I'm looking at is maybe is it possible to have like a Christian History Month, because Christianity is something which has influenced society in massive ways and things like that. And basically the way that the history months seem to work is that it's an opportunity for outside groups to come into a school or to come into a workplace or something like that and say, this is how the history of people who belong to this minority grouping have had a positive impact on society. These are some of the ways that they've essentially been persecuted or some of the stigma which exists around them. And by educating people about the history of this group, we can remove some of that stigma, basically. And so I think what we want to be doing is that whenever you see something in a workplace or a school, and you see somebody doing something associated with these different groups, you say, well, what does that mean for my values? What's the equivalent? So if somebody is placing an LGBT flag, in the office, or has it on their desk or something like that, well, maybe the equivalent, if you're pro-life, is to have a pro-life flag and say, these are my values around sex or something like that. This is how I view sexuality. And probably it's something that would cause a little bit of an upset. But then you get to challenge, these kind of places on well, actually what you're doing is that you're deciding certain values, and that's not equality. That's not diversity. What you're saying, these are the approved groups, women, homosexual, ethnic minority when it comes to race or something like that, very interesting in the Church of England at the moment. So I don't know if you've seen what's his name, it's Robinson, Calvin Robinson. So
yes,
he applied to be a Church of England vicar, and he was denied the ability to do that pretty much because he didn't believe that the Church of England was institutionally racist. And so because employing him on that basis as a black person who didn't feel that he had to take the sort of, I guess, anti-racism stand. Now, anti-racism doesn't mean sort of like, I guess it's a particular set of beliefs about racism more than just saying like, I think racism is a bad thing, I think we shouldn't be racist and all those kind of things. It's a particular set of like, I guess, critical race theory kind of views and things like that. But basically, because he didn't hold to those prescribed opinions that a black person is meant to hold, they kind of said you can't be employed by the Church of England because we are institutionally racist, and lots of people are saying, well, you're proving that you're racist now because you're assuming that a black person should hold certain views, which not all black people do hold those views, and so and I think that's where diversity comes in, that basically these groupings can be divisive, so if you looked at, say, the Black Lives Matters manifesto, they said, I'll just see if I can bring up some of the points that they made here. Do I have it? So part of their platform they were standing on was defund the police, free ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, disrupt the Western nuclear family, or the Western prescribed nuclear family. Now, those views, which were in their kind of core manifesto, have absolutely nothing to do with race. No. That I'm against racism, but I don't hold those values. Like, I'm part of the family party. I think a nuclear family is a good thing, which I hold to, and there's plenty of black people who think that too, and so I think people need to start standing up where they are and saying, look, this diversity issue is being used as a device. It's being used as a device to put forward certain kind of ethical values which have nothing to do with the umbrella that they are sitting underneath. And by the same token saying, well, I belong to a minority, I belong to a certain grouping, and if this group has a right to say what they believe, I have a right to say what I believe. And I think in our planning, we'll be talking about some ideas we have around these things. And
it's sort of in the word, the more people will do it, the better. But I think what goes on in a lot of big businesses and virtually every government department as well, is basically indoctrinating adults. because you're training. Some of it's to do with your job, and the rest of it is the diversity, inclusion, equity stuff. And it is indoctrinating adults. And I think most people are not alert to it. They're not going in thinking, "Oh, I wonder what they're up to this time. What are they trying to, how are they trying to mold my political values this time?" They're just completely open to it, uncritical of it.
Well, I think it's that silent majority thing. So it's because we've been silent. It's not necessarily that the people in charge of HR departments have a particular affinity for these ideas or whatever. But society is being swept along by a narrative. And if nobody is putting the opposite narrative, they when I speak to people, suddenly this like, I've never sort of thought of it put like that.
Yeah.
If they can do this and you're saying that you should be allowed to do that, I don't think you should be allowed to do that. But if I say you shouldn't be allowed to do that, then I have to say that this group shouldn't be allowed to do this thing as well.
Yeah.
And so there's this sort of, people can see the justice in that there's you can't claim to be standing for justice and fairness if you then say, I'm going to treat two different viewpoints differently, Yeah.
Right. Well, watch this space to see where our discussions on planning goes on these things. I'll just bring in a couple of comments. Ban all religions, the world would be a more peaceful place. I think the history of the world doesn't bear that out, to be honest, where people have tried to ban religions. There seem to be less debates in schools. That's certainly true. I often say Scotland's a debate desert. And debates in schools are a wonderful thing. Let them hear genuinely diverse views being discussed respectfully, etc. I think that is a great idea. Maybe we should put something about that explicitly in our education policies, that we think having debates in schools is a good idea. Right, we've run on slightly over our time, but that was a lot of interesting issues. Thank you for your comments. Thanks, Phil, for coming on and chatting about these issues of the day. And next week, the next couple of weeks, we've got a couple of special guests. I can't remember what order they're in. Stuart Waitner's coming on soon. Quite a few of you will remember him. And also, I was speaking to a lady today in America who's been involved in the movement pushing back against what's going on in schools there. What's going on in schools there is exactly the same as what's going on in schools in Scotland, only not quite as bad. Actually, I mean, it's generally worse in Scotland. But the pushback against it in America has been a lot more widespread and a lot stronger. So that's what we're wanting to import here as well. So I'll be speaking to a lady about her experience campaigning there. But all right, thanks for watching. Those of you live, those of you watching later as well. And see you next week. Thanks again, Phil. Good night.